What if the moment you woke up wasn't the beginning of clarity, but the start of emptiness? What if seeing through the illusion didn't set you free, but quietly drained the color from your world? And what if spiritual awakening was never meant to excite you, but to unravel everything you thought made life meaningful? Somewhere along your journey, maybe after a powerful spiritual insight or a crushing personal collapse, you felt it, a shift. Like something deep inside you cracked open. For the first time you saw things clearly. The noise, the stories, patterns, they fell away. You recognized the illusion. And then, silence. At first it felt liberating, empowering, even. But then came the strange stillness, not dramatic, not loud. Just quiet. So quiet that meaning itself seemed to vanish. Like your soul had turned down the volume on life and forgotten how to turn it back up. You stopped chasing goals. You stopped craving validation, and not in a careless or destructive way. More like an internal sigh that echoed through every thought. A low hum of detachment. And then the questions began to surface, not with urgency, but with a haunting gentleness. Why do I feel so numb now that I finally see the truth? Why does clarity feel like a void? Here lies a strange paradox most people never talk about. We expect awakening to light a fire inside us. But for many, especially the seekers, the empaths, the quiet observers of life, it doesn't ignite. It empties. It dissolves. I remember speaking with a friend, brilliant, deeply intuitive, always quoting Eckhart Tolle, Alan Watts, Krishnamurti. After going through her own dark night of the soul, she experienced what she called a massive awakening. She said she saw right through the illusion of identity and ego. She detached from chasing success, performance, perfection. But just 2 months later, I found her staring at the ceiling, eyes blank. I used to cry about not doing enough, she whispered. Now, I don't care if I do anything at all. I thought awakening would ignite me, not leave me like this. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, never used modern spiritual lingo, but he saw it coming. He understood what happens when the unconscious becomes conscious. He once wrote, "Enlightenment doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." It sounds poetic until you truly understand what it means. Awakening isn't a grand finale. It's not the end of suffering. It's the beginning of something far more challenging, a slow and sacred psychological death. The death of the identity you've always clung to. Your carefully built structures, goals, ambitions, relationships, even your sense of time, all begin to dissolve. And here's the trick. Jung would remind us, your ego isn't gone. It's just lost. It has no map. The story that once gave your life purpose no longer fits. And without that map, your drive fades. Not because you're lazy, not because you're broken, but because you've left the old world and haven't fully arrived in the new one. You're in between. You've woken up from something, but you haven't woken up into anything else yet. And this liminal space is where the world misunderstands you most. Because what you're feeling right now isn't failure. It's not even depression. In the clinical sense, it's something older, something sacred. Jung believed our modern culture does everything it can to avoid this state, this pause, this sacred void, this deep, necessary in-between. But he saw it differently. To Jung, this wasn't the end of the journey. It was the threshold of true individuation. The real beginning of becoming your authentic self. And that's exactly where we'll go next. In part 2, we'll step deeper into this sacred pause and explore why this emptiness might just be the most important place your soul ever leads you. Don't forget to subscribe if you're walking this path. Tap like if this resonates. Share it with someone lost in the same silence. And leave a comment. Has awakening left you more empty than enlightened? You've just walked through the stillness, the silence, the pause after awakening. And now, maybe you're wondering what exactly is happening to you. You're not alone. Because here's the part nobody really talks about. The strange chapter. That doesn't show up in the highlight reels of spiritual Instagram pages. Nobody tells you about this part. And yet it's one of the most important moments on the path. So that's what we're diving into next. What's truly unfolding inside? Your psyche after awakening. And why this sudden loss of motivation might actually be the greatest spiritual upgrade you've ever received. If you know how to interpret it. But before we move forward, if you're someone who enjoys expanding your awareness and exploring the deeper layers of life, take a moment and subscribe to The Shining Life. This channel exists to help make the invisible visible and to guide anyone navigating the strange and sacred path of awakening. Because if you've been floating in that fog after your awakening, feeling like your inner fire vanished, let me assure you, you're not broken, you're not lazy, you're not even lost. What you're moving through is a psychological transition so deep most people can't even name it. It's not just a change in thoughts. It's a complete shift in how your inner system runs. The to-do lists, the 5-year plans, the productivity podcasts, the hustle playlists, none of it moves you anymore. But not because you've failed, not because you're falling behind. It's because the source of your motivation itself is collapsing. Jung saw this decades ago, long before it became a social media trend. Let's take a closer look. For most of your life, your sense of purpose came from your ego identity. The version of you that wanted to be seen, to be accepted, to be successful, to be loved. And that's not wrong. That's how human development works. Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. But awakening begins by stripping that mask away. Suddenly, you no longer care to play the game. Because now you can see the game. And that's where things start getting strange. Without the mask, your old goals don't fit. Your previous ambitions were crafted for someone who no longer exists. So now you feel like an actor who stepped off stage, but you don't know your lines anymore. That's why you feel stuck. You didn't lose drive. You simply outgrew the fuel that once powered it. Jung believed we're not here to serve the ego. We're here to integrate it, to align it with something deeper, something larger. He called this individuation, a journey of transforming from a fragmented self into a whole unified being, not the surface-level self that craves applause, but the soul-level self that connects to everything. And this deeper self doesn't care about status or approval or even certainty. It's not here to impress. It's here to express. Once awakening begins, your psyche begins to shift. It starts to reject anything inauthentic, anything that feels fake, forced, or driven by the ego. That might include your job, your relationships, even the big vision board you made back in 2021. That's why awakening feels both liberating and confusing. You're letting go of everything that no longer fits. But you're not yet sure what will take its place. Jung warned us. If you stop here, you get stuck. Many people do. They fall into spiritual bypassing. They start believing that nothing matters, that it's all an illusion, so they disconnect, float above life, numb out and retreat. But here's the truth. They're not transcending, they're escaping. They confuse detachment with disengagement, but the self wants something else. It wants to live through you. It wants to bring the divine down into this messy human body. The self doesn't want you to reject the world. It wants you to step into it differently, with clarity, with truth, with alignment. And to do that, you have to pass through this strange middle ground, a transitional space that Jung described in detail, but that most people fail to recognize while they're in it. Stay close, because in the next part, we'll uncover what that middle ground really looks like, and how to move through it without losing your center. Previously We explored how awakening dismantles your old drive and identity. Now we step into the strange and sacred terrain that follows. The part no one warns you about. The part that feels invisible but is quietly transformative. There's a phase after awakening that almost no one speaks of. It's not glamorous. It doesn't go viral. It won't get you thousands of followers. It doesn't look like glowing in a field of barley or posting profound quotes on social media. No, it looks like this. Sitting quietly in your room, not knowing how to explain what you're feeling. Watching the world rush by as you remain still. Carl Jung would tell you, you are not broken. You are in transition. You are between identities. You have stepped away from the ego. But you haven't yet discovered how to fully live from the self. And that space in between, as strange and empty as it may seem, is not a mistake. It is part of the rite of passage. But in today's hyper-productive society, stillness is mistaken for laziness. Rest is misdiagnosed as failure. And in that confusion, you begin judging yourself. That very judgment becomes the wall blocking the energy your soul is trying to summon back. Jung had a name for this sacred pause. He called it enantiodromia, a psychological turning where one thing flips into its opposite. After awakening, your inner pendulum swings. You move from ego-fueled striving to soul-led stillness. From I must do everything to why do anything. And that shift is not apathy. It is holy. It is how your inner world finds balance. Mythology has always known this phase. It is the time of the hermit, the symbolic death before rebirth. It is like the moment the caterpillar turns into goo inside the cocoon. Not a butterfly, not a caterpillar. Just something unrecognizable. In between, melting, and goo does not hustle. Goo does not perform, it dissolves. This is the exact moment when the ego panics. The ego demands action, identity, purpose, but the deeper self whispers, let it go. I am building something real, something lasting. This is where so much of modern spirituality avoids the truth. It teaches you to stay in the light, to just feel good, to follow your joy and ignore the pain. But Jung would say, if you skip the darkness, you skip the transformation. You skip the gold, shadow work, integrating the parts of you that feel shameful, uncomfortable, hidden, is not a bonus exercise. It is not optional. It is the real work. It is the essential curriculum of being a soul inside a human body. This sacred stillness, this quiet nothingness, is not failure. It is the space your unconscious finally needs to rise. You are not stuck. You are metabolizing deep truths. And your psyche is far wiser than you think. It will slow you down. On purpose, it will interrupt your clarity, your ambition, your energy, until you stop and feel what you've buried. Until you witness your own shadow. That is the real journey. And here's the beautiful twist. When you stop resisting the void, something mysterious starts to return. Motivation reappears, but it no longer feels like pressure. It's no longer noisy or anxious. It doesn't push. It pulls. It is ancient, gentle, a soul-led current that feels more like remembering than chasing. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not an idea, but a living compass inside you. You have been through the stillness. You've sat in the silence. You've breathed through the absence of answers. And now, something soft is beginning to stir within you, not lightning, not fire, but a quiet gravitational pull. Not pulling you back to your old life, but forward, to something new, to something that finally feels true. This is the voice of the self, and it doesn't speak in words. It speaks through intuition, through resonance, through symbols and quiet inner knowing. Jung called this the symbolic life. He believed that once the ego surrenders, and the unconscious begins to rise, we start living from something deeper than personality. That is when life stops being about survival and starts becoming about meaning. And here's the surprise. That meaning often appears beautifully ordinary, because when the self leads, you don't hustle, you simply respond. And in the next part, we'll explore how to recognize when the self is leading, and how to build your life around its quiet yet powerful guidance. You've stepped through the void. You've tasted silence. You've begun to hear the subtle voice of the self. Now comes the question, how does life actually feel when you start living from that deeper place? You're no longer pushed by fear of missing out. You're no longer chasing approval. Instead, you're pulled by a quiet sense of alignment. You don't force clarity to appear. You recognize it naturally when it arrives. Living from the self doesn't mean you'll wake up every day bursting with energy or excitement. You may still feel tired. You may still feel confused. Sometimes you'll grieve the parts of your identity that are gone. But what you won't feel is that quiet ache of self-betrayal. You'll no longer feel like you're dragging yourself through a life that doesn't fit. You'll begin to notice the shift. Maybe you start creating even when no one is watching. You say no to opportunities that look great on paper but don't feel true. You start moving not from your checklist, but from your curiosity. You no longer measure yourself by productivity. You start choosing peace over performance. This is the new engine. It's not adrenaline anymore. It's alignment. Carl Jung called this symbolic living, not living in fantasy, but living with soul, with meaning. You begin to trust your inner world, your dreams, your subtle gut instincts, the quiet synchronicities that show up in your day. You let your inner world become your compass dot. So what does this look like in the real world? It might be as simple as changing the questions you ask. Instead of what should I do, you begin to ask what is quietly calling me. Instead of asking what's the plan, you ask where is life nudging me. Instead of how can I prove myself, you ask what feels most honest right now. You're no longer trying to dominate life. You're participating with it. You're no longer trying to win. You're trying to be real. This doesn't mean you give up on ambition. You refine it. You turn ambition into devotion. Devotion to truth, to growth, to the present moment. And strangely, this shift doesn't slow you down. It empowers you in ways the ego never could, because now your drive is sustainable. It doesn't burn out. It doesn't depend on applause. It's not ego-driven. It's soul-powered. This is the motivation of the self. It doesn't aim to impress. It longs to express. And often, that expression shows up as creating, as healing, as teaching, as serving. Not because you're told to, but because your entire being says yes. So if you've been feeling like your spark has vanished since your awakening, know this. It's not gone. It's transformed. The old fire had to burn down, so that a deeper flame could be lit. One that doesn't flicker when external winds blow. Carl Jung never promised the path would be easy. And if you've made it this far into this video, you're already walking that path. This journey is not about reclaiming the old motivation. It's about discovering a new one. One that is rooted in your wholeness, not in your performance. This isn't the end of your awakening. It's the beginning of your becoming. If this message resonated with you, if it helped give words to something you've been quietly carrying inside, leave a comment below. Share your experience. We would truly love to hear how this path is unfolding for you. And if you want more reflections like this, if you want to explore psychology, soul, and self-awareness in a way that feels real and grounded, then make sure you subscribe to the Shining Life channel. Like, share, comment, and hit the bell so you never miss a new video. Because awakening isn't where your story ends. It's where your real story begins.